Relations branch. On his right is Mr. Li Kuai-hua, Senior Superintendent of Organized Crime and Triad Bureau. To the right of Mr. Li is Ms. Fu Yating, Senior Superintendent Operations of Kowloon East. To your rightmost is Mr. Kong Wing-Cheung, Senior Superintendent Media Liaison and Communications of the PPRB. First, there will be an opening remark before the floor is open for question and answer sessions. As usual, please identify yourself after you have raised your hand and been named to speak. Well, there was a previous session of a photo shoot of the exhibits. After the press conference, there will be another similar session. Good afternoon, everyone. Yesterday, there were assembles of protesters at Mongkok Police Station, Wong Tai Sin and Hong Kong Island. And in Tamar Island, there was a serious traffic blockage caused by miscellaneous items. At about 8, and there were also protesters using laser beams pointing at police officers. At about 8 p.m., after some commotion, protesters took the MTR to assemble outside the Mongkok police station. Some protesters used fire extinguishers outside the police station to disrupt public order. They've also used some wooden panels to block the road. Laser beams were used to point at police officers. Hard objects such as bricks have been hurled. Some metal balls were shot using slingshots, causing threats to those who were present. There were press reports saying that a number of protesters have moved to other places to cause damage after the assemble at a police station. At about 9 p.m., some protesters took the MTR to go to Temple Mall outside Long Cheong Road, and there was also road blockage of Long Cheong Road, and there were protesters entering the MTR station at Wong Tai Sin to damage facilities inside, including CCTV. We were aware that some protesters boarded a bus heading towards Lam Tin at Long Cheong Road, and there were inquiries made in relation to those who were on board of that bus. For details, I will defer to Madam Fu later. In relation to the stop search of the bus for investigation, I would have to point out that according to the police force ordinance, if the police found that anyone that we have reasonable suspicion that someone on board of any public transport vehicles has the intention or will commit any crime, then we have the power to stop and search. And I will now show you a video clip that will last about 1 minute. Well, because of technical problems, I will just proceed to describe the situation. In the clip, never mind. I'll just proceed to describe the situation. In the clip, you will see that, well, if you have watched different footage, you will find that our fellow colleagues have been saying, please to ask journalists to leave so that we can conduct the investigations on board the bus. This is based on a number of considerations. When a public transport vehicle has been stopped, it will be treated as a scene of crime, which is not suitable for press coverage. We will have to collect evidence at the scene of crime. We have to prevent people from interfering with the exhibits. We also have to take into consideration the security of the scene of crime. And during the investigation, there will be involvement of personal data and privacy, and we have to protect the same. It is our usual practice to set up police cordon line, and we have been doing the same. If necessary, we will continue to use the same practice to deal with scenes of crime. After we have completed preliminary investigation, we will arrest those that we have reasonable belief that they have committed a crime. We are aware that a number of reporters have been doing live cast of the situation. We have to consider whether arrestees will make use of these live casts to tip off other people at large. Anyone who obstructs or resists police officers who are in the execution of duty may be subject to offences of a similar nature. We respect the freedom of the press, but we have to make this appeal now for the sake of safety of reporters. We would like to say that when the police is dealing with public order events, from time to time a police cordon line will have to be set up. And when there is a storming of this cordon line, say for example throwing of hard objects or petrol bomb, then we have to use appropriate force to neutralize the threat. And sometimes we have to disperse people in front of the cordon line, and we have to use corresponding level of force. If reporters go between protesters and police, it may be dangerous. Let me give you another example. On the 31st of August, it was a time when the police was moving towards Admiralty from Harcourt Road near the Arts Centre. When the police passed under a flyover outside the police headquarters, there were rioters on the flyover throwing petrol bomb to attack police officers. You will see that on the left-hand side, under the flyover, there were police officers. On the right, on the flyover, there were rioters and a large number of reporters, and some we believe to be responsible or in charge of providing medical aid. At that time, our police officers have considered different ways to disperse the rioters on the flyover. However, there were other people present at that time. So when we used relevant tactics, we have to take all these into account. In relation to what happened outside the police station at Mongkok on the evening before last, there was an arrest made of a female. Afterwards, a large group of people surrounded our police officers. Punches were thrown. Other officers had to use the appropriate force in order to disperse the crowd. No one, for any purpose, should touch police officers or be too close to police officers when police officers are executing their duties. We appeal to frontline reporters to maintain a safe distance from police officers doing their job. I will now defer to Mr. Lee in relation to updated information about possession of offensive weapons.
Thank you. And in recent violent protests, we saw situations in which offensive weapons were found. I'd like to explain how we categorize these weapons. We would refer to Cap 245 of the Hong Kong laws, Section 33, and that is possession of offensive weapons in a public place. So what is meant by an offensive weapon? So there is an explanation of these weapons under the second paragraph. So there are three types of weapons, and there are three broad categories. The first type, articles made for causing injury to other persons, and the second type, articles adapted for use in causing injury to other persons, And the third type, any article suitable for causing injury to other persons. So these are the three categories. I'd like to elaborate more about the two main types. First of all, slingshots. You can see slingshots very often. I saw it during a live broadcast yesterday, and people were using it to attack the Mong Kok police station. Apart from using the item for attacking people, the item carries no other use, so it falls under the first category. It is considered a weapon. So if anyone is in possession of this item in a public place, it is clear that the item is used for launching an assault. The second type is a powerful slingshot like you see from the game Angry Birds. And rubber bands or other bands are used to hurl various objects. So you can see that such bands can be used as sport or rehab equipment, but upon modification, it can be used to sling various objects that can lead to injuries. And in that case, it falls under the second category. That is an article adapted for causing injury to other persons. According to the laws of Hong Kong, possession of these weapons in a public place can lead to imprisonment of up to 3 years. So I urge people who take part in the protests not to carry these items, or else if they are intercepted and found to be carrying these items, they can be brought to justice. I would now hand over to Mr. Kong. I would now report some figures from our operations yesterday. We arrested a total of 35 people yesterday, including 30 males and 5 males, aged between 14 and 39. The alleged offences include taking part in an unlawful assembly, possession of offensive weapon, disorder in public places, and criminal damage. In terms of the overall arrest figures, as of yesterday, we have arrested a total of 1,183 persons. In terms of court cases, on the 2nd of September, the police arrested 3 men in Liking for alleged disorder in public places and possession of offensive weapon. Yesterday, the police charged one of the arrestees for possession of offensive weapon, and he has made a court appearance at the West Kowloon Magistrates Court. In our operations yesterday, there was no record of injuries to police officers. In terms of the use of ammunition, in our operations yesterday, we deployed 7 beanbag rounds. At about 8 p.m. last night, about 100 protesters gathered outside Mong Kok police station, and they also barricaded the roads with miscellaneous objects at the junction between Prince Edward Road West and Nathan Road, and they also digged up bricks from the street. They hurled eggs, bricks, glass bottles, and stones at the police station, and they also shone laser beams at our offices. And like Mr. Lee said, slingshots were used to attack police officers. The police issued multiple warnings, but violent protesters still refused to leave, and as such, the police conducted dispersals. During the operation, protesters continued to hurl bricks, stones, and shot metal balls at the police station. So after the warnings were issued, the police deployed 7 beanbag rounds at the entrance of the police station, and in the 3 hours we were surrounded, we deployed 7 beanbag rounds, which are a non-lethal and non-penetrating weapon. The aim is to inflict pain on the violent protesters who refuse to leave. And at about 2 a.m., all the protesters left the scene. And I'd like to make some clarifications. According to some online rumors and reports, our police officers fired beanbag rounds at protesters without any warning. I'd like to reiterate our guidelines on use of force. We have very strict guidelines on the use of force. Our officers would consider the actual situation and threats on the site in deciding a proportionate and appropriate level of force. And after the aim is achieved, the use of force would be stopped. When using force, where possible, the police would issue warnings. But we must understand that in the violent incidents in recent months, very often violent protesters or rioters would attack our officers in a split second, including hurling bricks or firing slingshots or even hurling petrol bombs. So these were very common. Those assaults happen in a split second. So in an urgent scenario, our officers might deploy force without warning, and this would not be in breach of our use of force guidelines. I would now hand over to Madam Fu to explain our operation at Kowloon East yesterday. Thank you. I would now explain the incidents at Kowloon East yesterday. At about 8:45 p.m., about 40 protesters took the MTR train to Wong Tai Sin Station from Mong Kok. Some protesters vandalized facilities in the MTR stations, including CCTVs. Such acts were in breach of the court injunction order. It was also contempt of court, and the protesters might have committed criminal intimidation. After they exited the station, they used miscellaneous items to obstruct the westbound lane of Longchang Road and paralyzed traffic and disrupted public order. Subsequently, the protesters boarded a bus towards Kwun Tong with an intent to cause further damage. It was about 9 p.m. yesterday. Some conscientious citizens reported the case to the police. That a few dozen protesters boarded a bus towards Kwun Tong with an intent to cause damage. The police sent officers immediately and intercepted the bus for investigation. At 9:24 p.m., the emergency unit officers successfully intercepted this bus on Kwun Tong Road outside Kowloon Bay MTR station. At that time, about a dozen protesters hopped off the bus immediately at the sight of the police. The police pursued the suspects and managed to control the bus. And outside Amoy Gardens, we intercepted a suspect and seized masks, body armor, and laser guns. And there were more than 40 people on the bus at that time, and upon completing preliminary investigation, within a very short time, 11 citizens were allowed to leave. And during investigation, since the space was narrow and our officers were concerned that the suspects might carry offensive weapons, and there was a likelihood that they could destroy exhibits, out of safety and investigative considerations, the police asked suspects to raise their hands within a very short time. So this is so the allegation that people were asked to raise their arms for a very long time was untrue, and 33 people were arrested for unlawful assembly and possession of offensive weapon.
Let me conclude that we have noticed that violence has spread to different districts in Hong Kong, and this violence trend has also spread on to youngsters. We also noticed that the age of violent rioters is getting younger and younger, and the offences involved is getting more and more serious. Say, for example, possession of petrol bombs and assault of other people. We're worried that youngsters may not fully be aware of the gravity of such offences. We condemn those with a hidden agenda for inciting youngsters to commit such serious crimes for their own purpose. It is our natural duty to maintain law and order in Hong Kong. We believe that Hong Kong people have discerning eyes. We use different channels. They have used different channels to see the seriousness and the prevalence of violence in protesters. So we appeal to general citizens to say no to violence.
In Mong Kok, Wong Tai Sin and Hong Kong Island. At about 8 p.m., a large group of unruly protesters gathered outside Mong Kok police station, behaving in a disorderly manner. Not only did they point laser beams and barricades main roads, but they also shot metal balls with slingshots. Such violent acts pose a grave danger to the ordinary citizens as well as our officers on site. At around 9 p.m., some protesters traveled to Wong Tai Sin on MTR to carry on their rampage. Yet again, they vandalized the Wong Tai Sin station, smashing various facilities inside the station. After setting up barricades on Long Chang Do, they board a bus heading to Lam Tin. The police are duty-bound and determined to bring offenders to justice. Therefore, our officers got into the bus to carry out investigation. During the process, our officers politely asked the reporters on board to leave the bus due to a few reasons. First, privacy. During the inquiry, we will collect personal data from the suspects and must protect such information. Secondly, preservation of crime scene. We must take proactive measures to prevent suspects from ruining evidence like the offensive weapons they are carrying. Thirdly, chance of escape. We must prevent suspects from tipping off other offenders through live streaming of the press. Some offenders might exploit the media to forewarn others about the police arrest. Please note that it's an offense for a person to assault, resist, or deliberately obstruct the police in the execution of their lawful duties. The police always respect journalism and freedom of press. But we are aware that certain reporters stay very close to the point where they are rubbing shoulders with our frontline officers while they are carrying out their duties. During protests, when we are conducting dispersal operations, some reporters may stand in the way of our cordons as our officers are advancing through or using force. There are also occasions when radical protesters threw petrol bombs and offensive weapons at police cordons and hitting reporters who stood in between. It is very dangerous for reporters to be sandwiched between police and the protesters. And during violent incidents, it is indeed very difficult for our officers to distinguish between genuine reporters and protesters, or protesters who disguise as reporters. We appeal to bona fide members of the press to maintain a safe distance with our officers, especially when they are making arrests and carrying out dispersal operation. Now, I'll briefly talk about the offense of possession of offensive weapons. In brief, an offensive weapon is an article made or adapted for use or intent by the person having it in his possession for causing injuries to others. Therefore, some common device used by the protester, like slingshot and catapults, are certainly offensive weapons as defined by the Public Order Ordinance of the Hong Kong laws. Now I'll give you a brief update on the arrest figures. Since yesterday, we arrest 35 people, aged between 14 and 39, consisting of 30 males and 5 females. Their offences include unlawful assembly, possession of offensive weapons, and criminal damage. So in total, 1,183 people have been arrested since 9th of June. Now I'll briefly talk about a violent incident in Kowloon East yesterday. Our officers arrested 33 people, consisting 28 males and 5 females, for unlawful assembly and possession of offensive weapons in an operation in Kowloon Bay. As I mentioned earlier, around 40 radical protesters brought a bus heading to Lam Tin after they caused extensive damages to Wangdaixin MTR station. Their acts were in breach of an injunction order in force in MTR. Our officers spent every effort to prevent them from escaping, so they brought the bus in Kowloon Bay for investigation. After inquiries, our officers let 11 ordinary passengers go and arrested the 32 protesters on board. We have seized offensive weapons like laser guns and riot gears. In conclusion, the ongoing protests can be likened to an infectious diseases spreading across the city and poisoning the minds of many young people. There is certainly no quick cure to this disease. Every person in society has a role to play in nursing Hong Kong back to health. We sincerely appeal to everyone, members of the public, to join us. Please make a clean break with all violent and criminal elements and put Hong Kong back on the right track. Thank you.
好，以下問題時間，
Now is question and answer session. The one wearing a blue top, second row with glasses. I'd like to ask, in relation to Prince Edward Station, the arrest of an injured person. There were 6 police officers. Why did they have to pin him onto the ground? In the process, has any contravention been committed in the guideline of use of force? And in relation to children of police officers, I think Mr. Kong, you yourself is a victim. It's heard that children at schools might have been subject to bullying, and the JPOA also made a statement today about the situation. Are there ways to protect your children? Are you going to send police officers to protect children and by sending them to school? Who are you from? Tai Kung. In relation to the 2 incidents, about the first one, I believe you were talking about a press report of what happened at Prince Edward Station. It involved a male, and a large number of people surrounded him. There are 2 parts. I'll defer to my colleagues. The first part is in relation to the condition of the injured person. Mr. Kong will give you more details, and then I'll defer to Mr. Lee about the details of the arrest. About the second part, that is, children of police officers are subject to bullying. We will not give details about individual cases here. I will defer to Mr. Lee about the work that we will take up in relation to the situation. Well, I'll first give you information about the case before I explain about the use of force. This will help you comprehend the situation. Let me give you more information about an arrest made at Prince Edward Station yesterday evening. It was about 11 p.m. There were some people who saw an arrestee. The arrestee was wearing eye masks, helmet, body armor, and goggles, and he was doing something. He was vandalizing some ticket vending machines and also octopus machine. A report was made to the police. Within a very short time, an arrest was made. At that time, the person was trying to run away, so appropriate force was used by police officers to stop him. Just like what you have seen in the past, he was pinned down and then handcuffed. Well, there were some press reports saying that the neck was broken and the person was rendered unconscious. I would like to give you more information about the condition he was in.
After he was arrested, he was subdued on the ground. And there were people alleged to be paramedics or medical workers, and they offered to examine the person. Our officers explained his condition, that is, he was conscious and he could reply to questions. He was allowed to be taken to hospital on an ambulance. He was conscious and at that time, and he was capable of a conversation. And upon a body search, he was found to be carrying a list of items. I think you have taken photos of some of the exhibits, including police batons, slingshots, and suspected smoke bombs. So these are the offensive weapons I talked about, and also these are and there are some are also explosives. And upon verifying their identity, we found that he has been wanted by the OCTB for entering and remaining in the chamber on the 1st of July. We will continue to follow up on this case because he is wanted by the OCTB, so the offences would be dealt with together. As for the use of force, like Mr. Lee said, at that time, MTR staff saw that this person committed an offense in a blatant manner. He was using spray paints to vandalize the MTR station, so we believe this person was not innocent. And like my colleague said, this person tried to flee. That's why our officers subdued him with appropriate force, and he was arrested. After he was arrested, he was lying on the ground. He was lying on the floor. We then notified for first aiders and the fire services department to arrive to send staff to the scene, and the alleged first aiders offered help at the scene. In dealing with arrestees, if some people claiming to be medical workers and paramedics offered to help, then our situation would be very difficult. Like we have always said, the well-being and safety of arrestees have always been a priority for us, and there is no way for us to verify whether there's no way for us to verify the professional credentials of the self-claimed medical workers or paramedics, and if they indeed offer assistance, would they, if anything goes wrong with the treatment of the person involved, then who would be held liable? So these would be considered by the police. So we would insist for the ambulance to be called. This is in line with our practice of handling arrestees or other person who seek help. Most police officers are trained in basic first aid and basic medical care. So for simple bruises, that can be handled on site by our officers. After that person was arrested, according to our officers, we had about 10 officers dealing with the situation, and after the person was arrested, dozens or even up to 100 people at the scene surrounded our officers. In considering the security and safety of the arrestee, our officers hope to bring that person to the station control room, and that is to protect or safeguard the well-being and security of that person before paramedics arrive. The alleged first aiders suggested that we release his handcuffs to facilitate medical treatment, but like we said, there's no way for us to verify who these alleged medics were, and for security purposes, we cannot just casually release the handcuffs of the person in question. After first aiders arrived, or the ambulance men arrived, on their request, we released the handcuffs of that person to facilitate treatment. Later, the arrested injured person was taken to hospital for treatment. According to our officers, on the ambulance, the arrestee who was injured was able to communicate his basic particulars and his condition to the ambulance staff, and he claimed that he felt dizzy. According to information from the hospital authority, this arrestee is in stable condition, and this is contrary to some claims that his neck has been broken. The information simply doesn't tally, but since that has to do with the personal data of the injured person, we are yet to obtain a detailed medical report. I would defer to Mr. Lee for the second question. Most threats directed at families and children of police officers come from the internet. There has been doxing, and there have been threats in effect. So I want to stress that offenses that apply to the real world, many of them apply to the internet, including intimidation. That is something we have stressed time and again. As for our handling, and we would defer to the Cyber Security and Technology Crime Bureau. And more than 1,800 people have been doxxed, and they face different levels of disturbance, and some of which are children of police officers. As to how we can protect these people apart from carrying out investigation, it would depend on the actual cases. Some cases involve actual attacks or explicit claims of kidnap. So these are very serious cases. Apart from conducting investigation, we would deploy security officers or officers to protect them. I cannot divulge the details, but the level of protection has nothing to do at the rank of the officers involved. Anyone subject to such threats would be protected by the force. The reporter on the second row, please identify your name and organization. I'm from the Hong Kong Economic Journal. My name is Wang. I want to ask about the man in coma yesterday. Are you referring to the man at Prince Edward Station? Yes. I understand the force found out. Well, did you find out about the conditions of the man from your officers alone, or did you check video footage? According to the footage, the man was once not very conscious. If your officers had first aid training, does it mean that they did not have the relevant knowledge or expertise, or were they overcome by their emotions? They committed acts such as dragging the man, which could jeopardize him or his well-being. Even though those were alleged first aiders, why did the police stop them from offering checks or administering first aid? So can the police ignore the well-being of a person simply because he or she is a suspect? As for the beanbag rounds fired, you said 7 rounds were fired. According to media footage, one of the rounds was fired by an officer who dashed out from the police station to at the protesters. So, what was the split-second situation which rendered it impossible to show the orange flag? So, was it a chaotic situation?
I'll defer to Mr. Kong for the questions. First of all, about the arrestee at Prince Edward Station. You asked why we refused a self-proclaimed paramedic to offer treatment. We have explained we have to consider about security and safety. In the process, it's not the case that we refuse treatment outright. When the self-claimed paramedics say that, well, if the person has lost consciousness, perhaps the outer garment or the body armor could be removed. We have accepted the recommendation and did the same, as I have explained. In a general situation, I do understand that there are people who have a good heart and they have different experience of healthcare or medical background. But at that time, did we have a chance or the opportunity to verify their credentials? So under normal circumstances, we would not make such an arrangement unless it is a very urgent and exceptional situation. As we have already said, that we have received basic first aid training. I have received such basic training. Well, when someone's lost consciousness, does it mean that the pulse has stopped? They're two different things. We have called for an ambulance. According to our record, the ambulance arrived within 15 minutes. We're talking about ambulancemen, paramedics from an ambulance. They arrived within 15 minutes and treatment was given to the injured person. So apart from taking into account safety and security, we will also take into account the safety of the person injured. So about the dragging, well, we have mentioned this. There were about 8 to 10 police officers at the scene. We had to take into consideration all the different factors. From the assessment we have received, there were dozens of people, up to maybe 100 people surrounding the police officers. We had no alternatives, especially in recent times, in the past month or so, when arrests were made. There were people who tried to snatch the arrestees. So for sake of security, safety, the personal safety of the injured person, we try to consider all the factors and try to strike a balance. In the past 2 months, if there has never been any occasion when rioters or people trying to snatch arrestees, I'm sure that police officers would just wait there for paramedics to arrive. So, you have supplementary question? Perhaps you would let the Hong Kong Economic Journal reporters to ask follow-up question. Does it mean that the police could ignore the well-being of the injured person? Perhaps I will repeat it again. It's not the case that we have ignored that. We have a number of factors to take into consideration. There is no one overriding factor that dictated our decision. In the course of making an arrest and in the course of giving treatment, we will put in place various arrangements. Say, for example, to take the arrestee to a safe place. There were a number of factors to be taken into consideration. I'm not going to spend too much time to explain about that. The second question, that is, well, if we have stopped someone who claimed to be a paramedic to give treatment, we have made it very clear. I'm not going to repeat it here. Let me say this. You may think from the clip that the person has lost consciousness. But I can tell you that when the person has boarded the ambulance, the person was able to answer simple questions in relation to personal data, i.e. the name and the general physical condition. The information was given very clearly. So this this does not tally with the allegation that the person's neck was broken. And according to the information given to us by the hospital authority, the person is in a stable condition. About the beanbag rounds. According to some press report last night, well, it is actually not just last night. In a number of consecutive nights, some rioters, some protesters or some violent personalities caused trouble outside the police station. Say, for example, they use miscellaneous items to block the road. They use miscellaneous items to throw at police officers. As we've said a number of times, we respect peaceful and orderly expression of opinion in public order events at all times. Well, the actions outside the police station, were they peaceful? From press coverage and from the accounts given by police officers, I'm sure that it is a definite no. They were not peaceful. In relation to the use of beanbag rounds, as we've said clearly, in the use of force, if possible, we would give warnings. I think we are standing on different grounds. I don't think that rioters would let us know before they hurl petrol bombs. So in a split second, sometimes police officers will have to make a quick response. Otherwise, they would put other officers or other members of the public in a very dangerous place. The beanbag rounds we have used, let me repeat, is of a very low lethal force. One person was hit by a beanbag round, and the person only suffered pain, and that person just quickly left. And that was the objective we had in mind. We wanted violent protesters to leave. It's simple as that. Whether we could give warnings, if possible, we would give warnings. We are not going to get bogged down in an argument with you about what happened last night. Outside the police station, police officers gave warnings to those outside to disperse, to refrain from taking any violent actions, and to leave the police station as soon as possible. So it's the case that none of the beanbag rounds were fired with warning. According to the information given by our police officers, there were warnings given. But sometimes the warnings were just in general. It's a blanket one. Say, for example, we will use loudspeakers to say that people will have to leave as soon as possible, otherwise there will be dispersal. We will appeal to protesters to leave the scene as soon as possible, otherwise appropriate level of force would be used. That is the type of blanket warning I mentioned. If it is a very urgent situation, say, for example, someone using slingshots to fire metal balls at police officers, to use bricks to hurl at police officers, apart from a blanket warning, we might not be able to give clear warning each and every single time before we use force. Let me tell you clearly that for the 7 rounds of beanbag we launched, we used them with reason, because we were being attacked. We were under attack by rocks, by bricks, and metal balls. So in a split second, we responded with beanbag rounds. I have no other things to add. The lady at the front. I am from Xinhua. On the 3rd of September, the security secretaries has talked about children of police officers being subject to bullying. And secondly, there were injunction orders for the airport and MTR stations. Still, there were some violent disturbance and damage inflicted on at these places. These perpetrators have blocked the roads as well. Do you have any measures to prevent them from happening again?
We saw that the violent protests are escalating, so can you report to us the latest figures on police injuries? I'd like to, for the second and third questions, I would defer to Mr. Kong. As for bullying of the children of officers, as for the proposal by the Secretary for Security, we would take that into consideration, but we have no further comments to make. If there is a need, we might provide protection. And in the force, we have psychological counseling or support service, and these services can help support people who are psychologically bothered. With regards to injunction orders at Hong Kong International Airport and some MTR stations, I'd like to elaborate more. Under the rule of law, everyone must comply with this court order, or else it would be an offense of contempt of court. It would be a direct disregard of the rule of law if one doesn't comply with the court order. By committing an act that is in breach with the order, it would be an offense. There's no need to prove the criminal intent. And as for the injunction order at Hong Kong International Airport, an injunction order has been filed with the court. I urge the public not to openly violate such orders or challenge the rule of law, or else you might commit the offense of contempt of court. As for specific situations or cases, we are constantly gathering intelligence and conducting risk assessment, and with relevant stakeholders such as MTR Corporation and Hong Kong International Airport, we maintain regular communication, and resources would be deployed if necessary. We will not tolerate any form of violence. As for injuries to police officers, since our operations starting from the 9th of June, 214 officers were injured on duty, including 201 males and 13 females. They were aged 20 to 54. As of yet, no officer has been hospitalized, but some suffered relatively heavy injuries and they are still on sick leave. I have nothing more to add. RTHK 3.
RTHK. On Saturday, the police stopped journalists from reporting in Prince Edward Station after some police officers used batons to beat up passengers on a train at the station, and they argued that it was a crime scene. And yesterday, police also barred reporters from carrying out their reporting work inside a KMB bus in Kowloon Bay. But according to the police general orders, police officers are supposed to facilitate the work of journalists. Police have often accused journalists of obstructing their work, but aren't the police also obstructing reporters in these cases? My second question concerns the beanbag rounds fired near Mong Kok police station yesterday. Can you explain why the police had to use such force when the protester didn't appear to have attacked the police officers? Did police use excessive force in this case? And my third question is about the arrest made in Prince Edward Station yesterday. Several police officers subdued and arrested a young man. And a medic at the scene said the young man was unconscious and experienced a life-threatening condition while he was being subdued. Could you clarify whether he was briefly unconscious when he was under arrest? And if he was unconscious, were the police officer right to refuse to unlock his handcuffs and bar the medics from treating him immediately and also drag him on the ground? Was that appropriate? And is arresting people more important than saving the life of a person?
I'll answer the first questions, and Mr. Kwong will answer the other two questions. I think I must reiterate that police always respect freedom of press and citizens' right to the information. And from what we can saw inside the bus, our officers very politely invited the press to leave the bus yesterday, and basically most of the reporters complied with that, and they have no objection to our invitation. And but the location we talk about is actually a crime scene, and we invite the press to leave the bus after a certain period of time, before the 11 ordinary passenger, before they left the bus. Basically, the reporters are allowed to stay inside the bus. And we need to corner the scene for our investigation. And this has always been our arrangement for a crime scene. When we decide to cordon off a crime scene, we basically take into consideration a number of considerations, including the number of arrests at that particular moment. Like for the bus, we arrest more than 30 people. And for the situation in Prince Edward MTR station, we arrest more than 60 people in that night. And we also need to consider about the collection of evidence, as well as security issues if the number of arrests is large, as well as the safety of everyone, including the reporter on site. For the Prince Edward MTR platform, we also designated that area as a temporary holding area for all the arrested persons for further inquiries, as well as preliminary or initial search for those people. All this procedure was not appropriate for reportings, and it involved the privacy of all the arrested persons. And basically, as I mentioned again, cordon off an area as a crime scene has been our arrangement for a long period of time, and we not cordon all the area at all times. So I think the incidents in both Prince Edward MTR station as well as the bus, we consider that is an appropriate decision to consider them as a crime scene.
For the second question about the beanbag round, maybe I have to recall the incident which happened at around 8 p.m. last night, during which there are around 100 protesters, some of them are violent ones, gathering outside Mong Kok police station. During which they use different objects or different items to block the road, as well as to dig out some bricks from the ground. And in the process, they have threw different objects to the police station, including eggs, bricks, glass bottles, stones, and some other hard objects. And some of them even used slingshot to attack our officers. These actions actually pose great danger to the general public as well as to our officers. So, after repeated warnings, the crowd didn't disperse, and therefore the police had no choice but took action against this crowd. During the process, some of the violent protesters still attack our officers with bricks, with stones and slingshot. So after warning, our officer has shot 7 beanbag rounds against the violent protester. I have to reiterate that the use of beanbag round is totally justified, because at that time our officers are under serious attack from the violent protester, and beanbag rounds are considered to be less lethal weapon. What I mean by less lethal weapon is that actually we would like to stop the violent action of the violent protester by the beanbag round. After we sought the beanbag round, actually we can see from some of the media clips that when a violent protester was sought by a beanbag round, he will feel painful and then he will cease his violent act and left the scene. And this is what we would like to achieve. And we consider that the level of force used is appropriate, and we also achieve the aim that we would like to. Concerning the last question about the arrest of a young man for criminal damage at Prince Edward MTR station. At around 11 p.m. last night, the MTR staff saw a young man who damaged the ticket machine by spraying some paint on it. And therefore, they make a report to our officers, and in 5 minutes, our officers arrive at scene. And at that juncture, our officers still saw that young man making damages against the ticket machine. So our officers came forward and arrested him, and during which he had put up a serious struggle, and therefore we have to use appropriate force to subdue him. And after we subdue him on the ground, probably he's not feeling well, so our officer had also summoned the assistant from the ambulance. And actually, in 15 minutes, the ambulance man arrived, and appropriate medical treatment could be arranged for him. And before the ambulance arrived, this relates to your question then. Before the ambulance man arrived, some citizens or some members of the public claim themselves to be medic. However, I have to reiterate here that normally we have to make serious consideration before letting any of these so-called medics to do any medical treatment to the arrested person, because as police officer we have the duty to ensure the safety, the security, and also the medical well-being of any arrested person. So first of all, our officer may have difficulties in confirming whether that so-called medic had the formal qualification to do any medical treatment on the arrested person. Otherwise, we couldn't confirm whether he really could help the situation. So that's why our officers sometimes, or in most of the circumstances, will not allow this so-called medic to do any medical treatment on arrested persons. However, actually, our officer had taken into consideration about the advices. For example, upon the advice, we have removed his armor, remove his outer clothes, so that he could feel better. And also the so-called medic asked whether we could remove his handcuff. However, as I have mentioned, the safety and security of the arrested person is always our priorities. So considering the security reason, we couldn't remove his handcuff upon this request. And concerning, I have to tell that I totally disagree that we dragged him on the ground or so. Actually, after we arrested this young man, our officers find that up to almost 100 people were surrounding us. Because of security reason, our officers decided to remove the arrested young man to the control room of the MTR. where we consider a safer place to handle this arrested person, not only for police officers to handle, but also for the ambulancemen who arrive at scenes later to handle it more safely. And that's why we try to remove him or try to move him to the control room of the MTR. And I think that's sort of my answer.
今日最後
Clarify whether the man was unconscious while he was being subdued before the ambulance arrived.
Yep. Concerning this part of the question, actually, after the ambulance man arrived, initial medical treatment were done on him, and then he was taken to the ambulance and conveyed to the hospital. According to the escorting officer, that arrested young man could answer the question asked by the ombudsman, including the basic personal particulars of him, as well as the medical situation of himself. So I think this may be a little bit different with the serious allegation or the serious injury that was claimed on different media. And according to our information from the hospital authority, the situation of this arrested young man is stable, and that's all I could supplement.
Can you answer the question about whether he was unconscious while he was being arrested within those 15 minutes?
I couldn't assess whether he is really unconscious or not, but according to our officers, he didn't give any response when we asked him questions after he lay on the ground.
好，今日嘅最後兩段，並講。
Last two questions of today, Apple Daily. I have three questions. First question is about the arrestee. On the 2nd of September, in around Prince Edward, a young girl wearing a pair of shorts was arrested. The young girl was shouting her name and the ID card number. However, her mouth was covered. Based on what did the police officer cover her mouth? Can you give clear guidelines to members of the public in the future that once they have been arrested, they are not allowed to shout their names and ID card number out? And it's also on another arrestee outside Tai Wai Station on the 1st of September. A district councillor of Sha Tin shouted a number of things, saying that black cops, etc. He was arrested. And he said that he was arrested for under Section 17D, disorderly conduct in public. But he couldn't see any reason why, after shouting a number of things, including black cops, he would be arrested for disorderly conduct in public. Are there explicit provisions of the law saying that someone is forbidden to shout these slogans without even storming or protesting? And on the 11th of August, in Causeway Bay, there was a young person. The person was arrested, beaten, and lost a number of his front teeth. There was footage saying that once the person was subdued, police officers used baton to beat the person on the head twice. So, Mr. Lee, can you explain to us if someone struggles and force was used, then from the footage, how did you see that the person was struggling or resisting, hence the use of force? In relation to individual cases on particular dates, I don't know if Mr. Lee could recall them all, but perhaps he will be able to share with you some information based on the point of law. Three questions. The first, a young girl with her mouth covered. I don't have any information about that, but I'd like to say this to you. It's quite common now. When someone's subdued by police officers, very often, they would say something about their names and ID card number. I'm not going to comment on the 40 or so people arrested. This is what we do. If it's found that someone has mentioned their names, their personal information, we would use that footage as evidence. It shows that the person was present at the scene. We have to be fair. So, would it be to their benefit? Would it be to their benefit, or would it be a suitable circumstance to divulge your personal information to the public? I think I'll leave it to the arrestee. Well, the question was, are there laws forbidding that forbidding someone from shouting their names and ID card? No, but our perspective is that if someone shouts their names, ID card, number, and contact number after the arrest, the footage will be used as evidence. It's their choice. But does the police have the power to stop that? The Hong Kong Economic Journal reporter has already asked the question.
Let me put it this way. I'm not asking a specific question of that incident in which the girl's mouth was covered, but I would just say that it could be taken as part of the evidence. As for the incident on the 1st of September, I did not follow that case because it wasn't handled by us. I'm not very clear about the offences involved, so I would not waste anyone's time. It was a general question. Many people would verbally also scold police officers. Was it unlawful? Well, there's no offence of disrespect towards police officers. I'm referring to the incident on the 1st of September. If the language or acts of a person lead to reactions from other people, then it might be a different story. But I don't want to comment on this case in particular. So for the case on the 11th of August, thank you for sending me the video. I have played it a number of times. Well, I have actually watched it before. So if videos are to be taken as evidence, then, if I assume the footage has not been modified or butchered, then the baton apparently might not be hitting up the person's head. It might have hit the ground instead. So this kind of discussion is rather difficult. So, and if the person in question feels that it was a case, and that person might want to take appropriate action. Well, different people have different perspectives about the video, so we need more information sources. Did it look like the baton hit the ground? But apparently it did not hit the head. Well, of course, different people could have different conclusions, and this is not surprising. So I think this would be a fairer comment. Final question, please. TVB, please. When Mr. Gong offered an answer in English, well, the question was during the 15 minutes when the arrestee was subdued, was he unconscious? You confirmed that he could answer questions on the ambulance, but in English.
While he was on the ground, 咁究竟係 he didn't respond 係冇答你？
So did it mean he did not respond to your questions on the ground, or was he unconscious during those 15 minutes? So what was his condition during that time? Can you fail to confirm that? The second question was about what happened at Prince Edward Station, and when you gave your reply in English, you said the police and arrestee were surrounded by about 100 people. did you observe whether anyone tried to stage a clash, and was any officer under attack? You said the judgment of the police is professional, and why would people have the impression that, or why would the police have the impression that some people might want to seize the arrestees instead of thinking about the well-being of the arrestee? 1,183 people have been arrested so far. Mr. Kong said the protesters are like an infectious disease. So many people have been arrested, but the protests are getting more and more frequent and radical. So what does this show? Does it mean the police are not arresting enough people, or would each arrest lead to even more vigorous or stronger reactions? I would defer to Mr. Lee for the first question, and then Mr. Kwong for the second. I will take the third question. We are the investigation unit, and I might come in contact with some witness statements or the relevant timestamps of arrests. Arrests were made at 11:16. And they were taken to hospital at 11:23 via ambulance. So what happened during these 7 minutes? Well, Mr. Kong explained that already, but I want to stress that 3 people claimed that they could offer medical assistance, and the arrestee could answer their questions very clearly. And by 11:23, when the ambulancemen arrived, when the FSD staff arrived, the man was found to be capable of answering questions from the ambulancemen clearly. He could inform them of his family contact, and in 7 minutes, that is from 11:16 to 11:23, we saw he was talking and he had a clear mind. So these are objective facts, and I hope these can help you understand the situation. As to our on-site assessment, I want to offer some examples that were not part of this operation. Very often, after the police make arrests, as usual, we would consider the well-being and security of the people involved. And that's why we would have arrangements such as setting up cordon lines. And after making arrests, we might set up a cordon line, and members of the public cannot get within 8 or 10 meters of the scene. And sometimes, if a cordon line is not appropriate, we might bring the arrestees to backstairs of a building or indoor areas of a shopping center. The idea is not to expose an arrestee to a vulnerable location in terms of their well-being and security. And our officers were surrounded by 100 people after we made an arrest. The situation was not ideal, and based on common sense and our general training, after an arrest is made, we would try to bring that person to a less crowded area. If there are a lot of people at the scene, we would not know the intents and backgrounds of everyone. So this is a normal form of assessment. As for the case last night, with regards to the on-site assessment, we would consider multiple factors. We would not only consider well-being or security factors. We will think about a lot of different factors. As to how first aid can be or rescue can be provided, those are among our considerations. At that time, our colleague's assessment was that if the arrestee could be brought to a room without jeopardizing his well-being, that would be the best option. If that person has fainted or felt unwell, then other people would be asked to be dispersed so that the injured person can feel more comfortable. Being surrounded by 100 people is certainly not common or ideal.
That's why our police officers have considered taking the person to the control room of the MTR, where it is quieter with less irrelevant people around. Those were the factors taken into consideration. I'll defer to Mr. Tse about the third question. The police force is an enforcement agency. The police will enforce the law when the law is broken. It is our duty to do so. In relation to what you said about infectious disease, I was referring to a violent trend spreading to youngsters. That is our concern. We're worried about it. In recent protests and amongst protesters and arrestees, we found that there were more and more youngsters being arrested. We found on them dangerous articles, including what happened last week. We found 2 petrol bombs on the person of a 13-year-old. They also participated in violent acts. When I refer to an infectious disease, well, I refer to the trend found amongst youngsters, which causes concern. The police force is a law enforcement agency. We enforce the law when the law is broken. We have to curb such undesirable trend. To stop it from spreading further amongst youngsters, it is the duty of everyone in society. That's the duty of the force, of the police force. We have to do something about raising awareness as well. We have made similar appeals at different platforms. People who don't participate, just ordinary citizens, should not condone such acts. They should not find excuses for protests. Well, in the past weekend, over 100 petrol bombs have been thrown by protesters. How much effort has been put to point out these wrongful acts? Stopping violence is the duty of everyone. We should say no to violence. Just now, Mr. Lee talked about the chronology. We saw footage showing that the arrestee was taken to somewhere behind a pillar, and then a group of people came from behind the camera to surround police officers and to talk to them. So you talk about 100 people surrounding the police officers. When was that? I can't give you any information now. Just now, you said this is the end of the press conference. No, it's about the chronology. Just now, it was mentioned that answers were given to medics, and you talked about on board the ambulance. However, Mr. Lee said that there were 3 people who claimed to be medics, and there were exchanges. What happened? Oh, those who claimed to be medics. Yes, those who claimed that they would be able to provide treatment, those 3 people. And that was the time between an arrest was made and before the person was taken to the ambulance. So that's the end of the press.